All right, we are going to get started today. I am Molly Evola, Director of Marketing here at Chain.io. I'm going to pass things over to Brian Glick, Jim, and Jack for introductions and the discussion.
Thanks, Molly. Welcome, everyone. So today we're going to be talking with the team from Century and AutoZone, with Jack from AutoZone and Jim from Century, about how logistics service providers and shippers can work together from a technology perspective in an environment where shippers rely on the logistics provider for more than just logistics. There's a big buy versus build debate that goes on inside every shipper of should we have our own TMS? Should we be managing things ourselves entirely and only using our providers for transportation or customs? Or should we be relying on their technology? And it's a very complex and sometimes moving target within companies. And I know that Jack, who I've known for many years, has gone through a journey here. And I thought it would be interesting for everyone to hear about that story. Before we dive in, I want to be clear because I think transparency is important in this industry. This is not a paid promotion for Century or Chain or AutoZone. Clearly, if you want to go buy auto parts there, everyone would be happy if you did, but there's no money exchanging hands here. I just have known Jim and Jack for a while and thought that this would be a very interesting story to share amongst everyone. So with that lead in, Jack, do you want to maybe introduce yourself real quick and AutoZone for anybody who somehow might be unaware?
Yeah. So anyway, Brian, thank you very much. Molly, thanks for organizing everything over the last month or so. So yeah, Jack Conaghan, Director of Logistics, been with AutoZone now a little over 4 years, responsible for international logistics, the domestic, as well as the parcel. Been in the industry for more than 30 years. So thank you, Brian.
Cool. And Jim, you want to do a quick introduction, and then we'll ask Jack to maybe frame up where AutoZone stood from their supply chain.
Sure, sounds good. So yeah, I'm Jim McCullen. I'm CIO at Century Supply Chain Solutions. Like Jack, been in the industry for 30 plus years, helping build and design supply chains for our customers. Century, we're an LSP, a global logistics provider focused on PO management, origin cargo management, and really bringing together the tech and the operations. And so, yeah, excited to talk about it today.
So Jack, I would imagine prior to meeting CDS, AutoZone had a functioning supply chain, right? There was product in stores and things were moving. What kind of prompted were the challenges that led you to say, hey, we need to do something different?
Yeah, so very good question, Brian. Right, I started with AutoZone at a very interesting time. We I started in February, and then the pan of 2020 and the pandemic hit, obviously starting in March, right? But things really didn't get, I would say, bad until 2021 or early 2021. But when I came in, right, we were using predominantly NVOs. We were using a legacy order management company. We had many dray providers that weren't functioning, I'll say correctly. We were also doing self-filing, right? So, and we only had 3 ocean contracts with direct carriers, right? Which was all fine and dandy because our volume was low. And then the pandemic happened and our business took off, and our business, more than on the international containers, almost doubled. So, in the beginning, when we had issues, it was like, well, we cannot make any changes. And then, I'd say about September of 2021, I was like, well, we're going to need to make some changes, is because if we don't, we're going to drown, right? And the fear of making changes was always, do you change, horses midstream, right? Because you had this crisis going on. And then are you going to be able to flex to another, provider and be successful? And, in September of 2021, we started that journey. It did take us until 2022 to start making changes early 2022. But the vision is to get off of Excel spreadsheets, give visibility to, not only the order management company, or the company that was booking our orders, but to basically electronically pass information to our customs broker, pass electronically information to all of our dray providers, because we do go into 8 ports and railheads throughout the United States, pass that same information to our audit company that's doing all of our invoicing on the ocean, as well as on the dray and the transloading, and sort of build out this vision of taking, I'll say, you're always going to need people in this industry. It's very important. This is still very much a relationship business. But we wanted something that would allow us to flex as business grew. And I don't feel right now, if we were to grow by another 30 to 40%, I don't need to go to my management and say, I need another headcount, right? I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call. When you ask for headcount, the first thing everybody says is why, and it's not in the budget, right? So I wanted to put ourselves in a position where we did not need to ask for headcount in the future. Now, if we continue to grow, we might need headcount, but we would probably have to double in size at this point. So, long-winded answer to your question.
So I know that there are software companies who would walk in your door and say, "Oh, you just buy this software and it will solve the problem because it's going to make you more efficient. It's going to get rid of the spreadsheets. It's going to, do everything and make toast in the morning and coffee."
Right.
What was how did your thought process evolve from, whether we need to buy software, we need to build software, or we need to work with someone who's going to bring software along with them?
Yeah, really good question, right? We did go down that path, and we did try to build something out in partnership with a very good company and a forward-thinking company. But what we had found is, and maybe it's because of the size of our company, and I would say we're probably on the larger size of importers, but there's companies that are obviously a heck of a lot bigger than us, whether that's the Walmarts, the Targets, the Home Depots, they're just giant, right? We tried to build it out, but what we found is we didn't have boots on the ground to then take care of those day-to-day problems, right? And we needed almost, I'll say, an out-of-the-box solution, but Century did allow us to do different things that was important to our business, right? And I just don't know if it would make financial sense for us to go and build a solution and get everything we need. And I know we couldn't really build it in-house. We would probably have to partner with a company that had a system. But really, what Century brings to the table, even I'm sure importers are struggling now with everything that's going on in the ocean market. I don't know where we would be if we didn't have that Century personnel over in Shanghai, in different parts of China, trying to secure those bookings and communicating that back to us day to day. Not only communicating it, but electronically sending us updates, right, of where we're at, so we can chase those ocean carriers or an NVO and try to get space, right? So for us, it just didn't make sense. I'm sure for different people, it does make sense, but that boots on the ground, day-to-day operations is very important to us.
And let's bring Jim in for a second. So, I'm sure you hear that or say that a lot as well. Kind of what's the dimension of between Jack mentioned a Walmart or a Home Depot where they're going to have hundreds of analysts in their supply chain department and an IT department embedded inside of the supply chain. And, those companies have a different profile, but kind of how do you think about what does a company look like that's the right company to be engaging with a service provider this way?
Yeah, so I think Jack brought up some really interesting points, right, around being able to grow your supply chain without having to add headcount, being able to deal with the crisis of the day, which every day seems to be another crisis in supply chain these days, right? And so, I don't know that there's a specific profile. I mean, we deal with customers anywhere from 1,000 containers to hundreds of thousands of containers. I think it comes down to more that mentality of, do you want to own and take responsibility for all of the technology, or do you want somebody like Century to manage that component of it on your behalf, along with the operations side? So, what we bring to the table is a really nice blend of the technology and the operations, but also the data, right? And, Jack mentioned all the data moving around. And, as an LSP with the technology, it's our responsibility to make sure that data is right, is complete, is accurate. And so when you're working with a pure technology platform, a lot of that ownership falls on the shipper, on the importer, to have resources available to know how to use that technology, how to manage the exceptions. And as Jack mentioned, when you start to think about the origins, right? Yes, you can deploy the technology with different forwarders and vendors, but then still your team's got to own that. So I think, what Century brings to the table is just that, we're taking ownership for the technology, but everything we do operationally starts with that technology and with the data. And, when you think about it today, the cargo is the number one priority, right? But the reality is the cargo is going to stop moving. The product is going to stop moving if the data is not there, right? So think about, product hitting your distribution center. Well, if there's not a receiving plan for your DC to be able to scan cartons into the warehouse, that's stuck, right? Or your containers are sitting at the port and you don't know that they've arrived, or your trucker, as Jack mentioned, your dray carrier hasn't been notified that they're there to be picked up right now, or your customs broker is searching for documents trying to clear freight, right? So the data becomes just as important as the product itself in the overall supply chain cycle. And then, maybe we can talk about it a little bit more later, but now when you start to bring in things like AI and automation, the quality of that data is so important, and being able to know that you're going to one source of truth to get it. So Jack mentioned, in the beginning that they used to deal with a lot of emails, a lot of Excel spreadsheets, and our platform is called VIZIV. In our VIZIV platform, all of that information exists in one place. And then, yes, you can still send spreadsheets or emails or whatever, but you're managing it from one source data set. So there's a level of trust there, and then you can distribute it wherever you need to go. So again, Brian, I think to your point, like it really depends on the individual shipper and what their kind of goals, focus, and budget supports as to whether they want to break these things apart and deal with technology and physical provider, or have a combined solution like Century.
Yeah, and I think as a pure play software provider who, while we don't offer a full PO management suite, we, people use our integrations to solve a lot of these problems. And one of the areas that we do see customers struggle is when, they set up these integrations and the integrations run, and they especially with origin processes, I would say more so than almost any other piece of the supply chain, they underestimate the need to actually have a good supplier management program and scorecarding. And it's like, yes, we will deliver the data, and we say to our customer the thing that you just said you should never have to sort of deal with, which is the like, okay, but you still have to call your supplier and say, you didn't send the data, right? And here's your scorecard for the last quarter, and by the way, 20% of your shipments you delivered the ASN 2 days late, right? Exactly. And that management process is still a human process at almost anyone who deals with anything retail related, at least, and I think even in the manufacturing side, there's an illusion that it's less, that it's more automated, but in my real life practice, it's still very much, chasing down why that person at that factory didn't hit the button to send the file, right? Which
And
we all want that button to not exist anymore, but it's still very much there in most systems.
Well, and it's true because that's where we see, in best, kind of practices in companies like AutoZone, where you've got that control in place. And so you have a level of trust that these factories are going to do what they're going to say they're going to do, right? And that's where the real challenge comes in, is if, like, you set a shipping window for a 2-week period and 30% of your vendors hit that shipping window, well, how can you plan anything from that, right? Like, how can you forecast to carriers what you're going to need from a container capacity, forecast to your distribution centers what's coming in, right? So to your point, Brian, like, you've got to build that trust level with the vendors to start with, so that you know what's happening on that front end of the supply chain, and then you can even go earlier than that, right, and look at the production planning and all of those kind of things. But again, you need that kind of common technology, and Brian, to Jack's point, the people to support it at each of those origins.
So with people comes culture, good or bad. Jack, kind of when you think about providers, and I know across your career you've worked with quite a few, kind of no matter what tech, those people still need to work well with your people, and kind of how did that impact your thinking, and when you kind of went through a selection process here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, when we're looking for companies, right, I think if you're doing international logistics and all of the trials and tribulations that come along with it, right, you just want a company that is going to, you don't mind if the company says no, if no comes along with a reason why it's no, right, but too many times people fall into no, or companies fall into no, is because there's hurdles, right, to get over, and it's too much to do, right? So the culture that I wanted to move forward with, right, because we totally radically changed the supply chain in about a 2.5, 3-year period, was companies that were going to say yes. And I have found that companies that we have worked best with, might be, family owned or family styled, right? Is, on the drayage side, on the brokerage side, sort of like more of a boutique. And I would say that Century falls into that. I can, reach out to Century, right, and say, I got this issue, I want to solve this problem. Nobody says no. Everybody says, we'll look into it, or we've resolved this issue prior, right? That's what I'm looking for in my provider base, right? And that would go even to ocean carriers and NVOs. No is fine as long as it's a valid reason why no is no, right? But we're here to solve problems, right? All of us, that's what we get paid to do. So that's the first thing I look for in culture, right? And that's sort of, AutoZone is a very unique culture unto itself, right? Our senior executives are very on top of the business, right? So if I have companies saying no, I gotta answer to my senior executives. I'm not going to be able to dance between the raindrops on that, right? So that's what we found in Century, and that's what we've really have found in all of our providers that we have chosen over the last 2.5 years. So
Jim, I've been on your side of this relationship several times in my career, and I know that there are customers who bring those challenges in a way that aligns them for success, and there are ones who just sort of throw problems over the wall, or don't even understand what they're asking for. So, what are some of your thoughts on what shippers can do when they're bringing this kind of challenge to a provider, to kind of arm themselves for success?
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's, I think first off, it's really thinking about, rather than trying to immediately solve it, what is the goal that you're trying to achieve, right? And being able to communicate that goal to your service provider first, and then let them work with you to figure out what that right solution is. Sometimes we'll have customers that are so fast to tell us, this is the solution, this is what I want, right? And it's really easy too at times for our customer service team or whatever to be like, okay, that's great, we'll go build it, right? And then you build it and you come back and realize, or deliver it, that it doesn't meet the goal that they were trying to achieve, right? So I think communication is really, really critical, and recognizing that our best customers are partners, right? And they want to work together to improve their supply chain, but be realistic in what they're asking for. And so being able to define, like, what are you trying to achieve, and then working through the details of how do we get there. I'd also kind of challenge today that in the past, I think customization was what everybody wanted, right? Like, you're going to customize to my supply chain. You're going to change things so it works the way I work. And I think there's more of a middle ground there today, right? Where it's, as we look across all of the different customers that we work with, everybody's supply chain is unique and special. But the more commonality that you can find, the more longer term value you're going to get. And again, as I look into, as we're automating technologies and using some of these new tools that are out there, if you have so many different work paths to get to the same result, it can become really, really challenging to be able to automate that, or layer on like AI type technologies on top of that. So, I would say to shippers out there, be willing to adjust a little bit, right? We can get you to the goal that you want to get to, but we may have a different way of achieving that, and just be open to it.
I think I watched a lot of companies. I've probably been involved in maybe 7 or 8 SAP implementations over the years from the sidelines with different customers. And one of the things that I learned through the first say 4 or 5, and then passed on in the last few, was you buy SAP because it's going to implement better business processes in your company, not because the tech. You're not buying it for the database, right? You're buying it because it's going to optimize. So if you go into it and say, we have to operate the way we did yesterday on this new technology, that's where the mods start coming in. And they're an early indicator that you're not going to get the benefit of the software, right? That if you're, approaching a provider and saying, hey, I run my origin processes this way, I run my supply chain this way, I only move things through the Panama Canal, and I only do blah, 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 blah. And I'm not willing to listen to you for a network redesign. I'm not willing to listen to you for changing our SLAs or updating our vendor manual or any of the, optimizing free trade agreements. Well, then frankly, just go to whoever's cheapest and move on, right? Because you're not going to get any better by using a more premium provider. So.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think, you're, to your point, being able to take advantage of that to kind of advance your supply chain, right? Like, again, it works the way it is in calm times, right? And Jack brought that up in the beginning, right? With COVID, everything changed. And so we're seeing more and more of these crisis situations, right? And your supply chain needs to be able to quickly adapt and adjust. And the more custom your supply chain is, at times, the harder it can be to adjust. And it's to your point, like on SAP, right? Like if you keep it out of the box and use it the way, its core is designed, you can upgrade easier, you can take advantage of new features easier. If you've gone in and really heavily modified it, you kind of get stuck in where you are. And we've had some customers that have basically SAP users that are, customers that have gone in and said, we're going to do a complete refresh and there's no customization, and we're going to adapt our operating processes to match to that. So yeah, it's, I think it's something to always be cognizant of is, do you really want to customize so much, because it can be a limiting factor in the future.
So you mentioned new technologies and being able to invest in, advanced analytics and the like. Jack, if you were to go to your internal IT department and say, hey, I really want to invest in new technology to do AI to optimize a free trade agreement or HTS codes or something esoteric, do you have the internal expertise in IT to support something very, I'm gonna say, technical on the trade side? Or is that where you have to go to a provider?
Yeah, I think, right. There's not enough. Well, first of all, every IT department, right? I mean, I joke with my IT guy is, I call him Jeff, I have no resources. So anyway, so, but, the other thing becomes is, the international is a little different, right? And the IT doesn't really understand it. I mean, landed cost comes to mind immediately. If I was to dump that onto my IT department, I would probably have to spend 2 weeks talking through that with them and how that it all works and connecting all of the dots for that. But, I don't know if there's the expertise, and I don't know, it becomes is what's the company's appetite for building something out, right? I found it in everything that we've done, thus far, right? It comes down to really the only thing we're sending to our partners, Century, is an 850, the purchase order information. And then everything is built and populated after that, right? So, I was able to eliminate that need for our IT department getting involved. Now, obviously, it's all on third-party systems, although I do receive an 856 for my mainframe from Century. But, everything is living and housing, in third-party systems, right? And we are tying it out with our yard management system. One of my guys is working on that now, that final delivery piece, right? So, but I have found it easier, to work outside of the system. Now there's things internally, different projects that I might be doing on the domestic side or the parcel side. I definitely need my IT department to be very heavily involved, right? So, but yeah, so.
I have to say, Jack, I'm impressed. The number of supply chain professionals who can throw around IT terms like 850 and 856 is a lot higher than the number of IT people who can explain what landed cost is. So kudos to everyone in supply chain for becoming IT people over the last 30 years.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
But it is true, like, there, first off, to Jack's point, corporate IT resources are heavily consumed in lots of different initiatives, right? And when you think about like the yard management system, or like, for example, freight audit, we're connected with Acuitive Solutions there. We've built those connections many times before, right? And so it's really just plugging it in and turning it on. And, from Chain.io, you guys are exactly the same, right, Brian? You've built these integrations with all of these different systems already, so that for us, it's much easier to implement than it is for the IT team at an AutoZone or anywhere else, right? Because they don't do that over and over again, whereas we do, right? And our tech people know logistics, and that's it, and technology, right? Whereas IT organizations across, the shippers, they're responsible for everything within that company. And so because we have this targeted focus, we can get these integrations built faster and easier. And a lot of times, we'll come in and coach our customers' IT teams on document formats and what they need to be able to be successful in these integrations.
So,
yeah, and just going back, I don't mean to interrupt you, Brian.
No, go ahead, Jack.
But Jim mentioned earlier, customizing, right? So even in all of the integrations that we've done, whether it's with the audit company, Acuitive Solutions, or our, Dre provider, or our customs broker, right? We haven't gone to Century and say, this is what we want, something special, right? We've gone to them and said, hey, what are you sending? What have you done for other customers you're sending? Is because I don't want to customize something so much that I think I'm smarter than everybody else, and then I find I have a problem 6 months later. Plus, I know it's going to move quicker, right? If I'm taking something that's out of the box, as long as it has all of the information that my providers need or my people need. So, you know, you want to stay, within sort of the walls, and make it as easy as possible, just to make the business happen, to give people visibility, so that everybody can do their job.
Yeah, and I the analogy that I always use with our customers is, you don't walk into the doctor and say, I need this surgery, or you shouldn't, right? A lot of people do, I'm sure.
Right.
You shouldn't walk in and say,
Googled
I
it,
need
and I
this
need it.
surgery. You should say, my knee hurts, because the doctor may look and go, oh, your knee hurts because your back's out of alignment, not because you need knee surgery, right? And that as a shipper working with a service provider, or even working with a pure software company, it's incumbent on you to ask the question in a way that opens up, gives you access to the knowledge inside of the provider, not just paying them to type what your instructions into a keyboard, right? Or internal thing that my employees hear a lot is, we're paid for our brains, not for our fingers, right? It's not the ability to type in a customer's request. It's the ability to think up a better way of solving the problem. And I do wish more shippers would come to their service providers with the problem at the beginning instead of their conclusion. And usually it's even 3 steps before that is where the real problem is. And the
Yeah.
earlier in that process that you engage the provider, the more an opportunity they have to really help you with root causes. So
Yeah, and on top of that, Brian, I would just say too, one of the things that we've been really successful with, or customers that we're really successful with, are when we have, an owner within the organization, right? So Jack is that owner within the organization, and if we're gonna do something new for AutoZone, it's gonna come from Jack, right? And he's gonna have thought out with his team that this is something we need, and I want this service provider working on it, because we do have some customers that we'll get requests from many different directions, and we'll have to try to redirect them to, like, you should have a single project manager or owner for this, so that you're making the best use of our time, but also really asking for things that are going to deliver value to the organization. So, I would just recommend both to shippers and to LSPs that, that's a really important part, because otherwise you can end up spinning in either direction, right? And not really get what you want.
So we have a question from the audience here for Jack. So what are the top 1 or 2 benefits that you've realized by adopting the kind of origin and PO management processes?
Yeah, so I think, right, the biggest thing, right, we did have PO management before we nominated Century. I guess we started using Century 2 years ago in our Mexico operation, because we do have stores down in Mexico. And then we started using about a year and a half ago for the US Century. And we did have a PO management company prior to that. But I think what it does give you is it gives you that control up front and that visibility, right? Is that you have one source of truth instead of using a whole bunch of different freight forwarders, to arrange your freight out of different origins. But you have that system right there. And then there is a relationship that the local offices builds with the vendor, right? And that's very, very key. Because you'll jump on a call, and if I bring up one of my vendors, the ladies that are overseas for the Century Group can say, oh, but they're always doing this. And, or they have this issue that does crop up, right? So you do have almost a visibility from 7,000 miles away onto what's going on locally, right? I mean, I did have some origin costs a couple of years ago, and or a year ago or so, that we were trying to figure out and go through. And I am FOB, but trying to understand the difference between Qingdao and Shanghai and Dalian, how the origin fees were, right? I was able to get on a call with one of the Century personnel, and he was able to walk me through it. And it actually, I mean, I'm at this international game for 30, 35 years. It totally blew my mind. I never knew all this, I'll say, BS went on behind the scenes, right? So, I mean, I think that becomes, it becomes the system. You have everything, and then you can start with the right provider managing that data, and who gets that data moved, right? Is to what other third party provider you have, right? To make your life easier, to make their life easier, whether it's the customs broker putting together an entry, or it's the trucker who wants visibility to what's on the water, or in transit, I should just say, 2 or 3 weeks prior to the arrival. So, I think Jim has said it in such a way, right? The data is power. And you could go back, I'll date myself 20, 25 years ago, when you used to have shipping and documents, was dispatched in pouches.
Stone, right?
Yeah,
I used to carry those boxes around the office.
Right.
That was my job.
But if it's almost is, if you didn't have those documents, you might not have had the shipment sitting on the vessel or have arrived, is because you're not going to clear customs. I almost look at the data the same way right now.
Mhm.
Is you can do all this shipping. I mean, I don't need a Century to do me. I can go get any Joe Blow to basically book freight with me. But if I don't have the data at this point, I need an army of people is to make sure my shipments happen and to track shipments in an Excel file, right? So, it's all about the data at this point. And it makes your life easier. So
this is leading me to a little bit of an abstract question, but I'm interested in both of your opinions on this one. When I first worked in PO management, it was about 25 years ago. And we spun out a separate company to do our PO management software. So we were freight forwarder and customs broker, and then we literally made a separate company with a separate brand identity. And Jim, you have technology inside the company that has a name, right? VIZIV, and that is conceptually, it's not just our system. It's that doesn't have a name, and it's just Century. It's a product. And actually, Jack, maybe you could answer this first. Like, do you think of the tech as a separate thing that you're buying from the service, or are you just buying a tech-enabled service? Like, how do you think about this in your head? Is it two things or one thing?
I think it's one thing. I think is the best way to answer it, right? I don't know, it's 2021, right? When I started putting on paper what my vision was. But my vision was not only to have a company that I could have a partnership with, but that did have the technology and that could move data. So I look at it as all in one, right? Because there are several good companies out there, but do they have the combination of the both, right? Is the people and the technology, right? So I almost look at whether it's order management, PO management, whatever you want to call it, but every facet of the business that way, right? I think my broker has the best technology and is able to provide me visibility. The truck or dray provider that I'm using as my main provider has technology. Probably some of the best is, even though it's very simplistic, of any provider out there, right? So I'm weighing these things as sort of all in one, right? I mean, I'll ask the question, and I mean, it's mainly driven towards dray providers now, is what's your technology? And if they answer Excel spreadsheet, it's like you're moving on and quickly, right? But you know, if they do have technology, you want to understand what they have and how they're going to communicate, how it's used, how does your people use it? Are they able to pass files, right? Are they able to integrate with your, you know, freight order company, right? So that's all in one. I think, you know, if you're not looking at it as all in one, you know, I just don't think that's the right long-term answer, right? And the technology is only going to get better, right? Over the next 5, 10, 15 years with the whole introduction of AI, right? And I mean, I'll give you an example and this might be sort of a left turn, but I was sitting in a meeting, I think it was Friday afternoon, and there's a CMA vessel that had engine problems, and you know, they said they were going to have to move it to Busan. It was outside of Japan at the time. So the question came up is in this Friday meeting, where is this vessel, right? And I don't want to say nobody had followed up, but it was sort of a week later, and we knew it was supposed to go to Busan. Well, you know, I opened up VIZIV and looked at the heat map and found the name of the, you know, I knew the name of the vessel, and I was able to put on the heat map is that vessel was basically docked in Busan. You know, and on a Friday afternoon at 4:30, right, chances of getting an answer and being able to tell anybody where the ship is, everybody has their answer, and I'm done, right? And we could follow up with the carrier on Monday morning, or even over the, you know, on a Friday to get an answer Monday morning. So it's those little things as far as technology goes, you know, that just starts to put you one step ahead of, you know, whether it's your competitors or being able to even just respond internally to people that need answers for their business.
To Jim, I'll throw it. I'll let you get back to the original if you'd like, but positioning,
kind of a political conversation. I'll stay on that topic for a second and then I'll come back. But yeah, no, on the heat map side of the, you know, the vessel visualizations and everything, critically important. Like when you think about what was happening in the Panama Canal, right? So we started geofencing around the canal so customers could understand, are these vessels, you know, waiting in line to get through the canal? And we were able to use that same technology for the Red Sea, and then actually be able to show that, hey, these vessels were intended for this route, but they've now been diverted, and automatically update ETAs based on that. So yeah, having all of that information is critically important to be able to understand. And I've had some really large customers come to me to say, their security team has come to us and said, hey, we want access to VIZIV because if there's a crisis going on in the world somewhere, we want to be able to see where our freight is and is it being impacted by this crisis, right? That's not the logistics team. It's the, you know, corporate security team that's actually coming in and looking at it. But back to your original question, Brian, around the you know, the one system. Yeah, we've had several thoughts of that in past years about, you know, do we break the technology off separately? And, you know, I think it's a very different company to sell software as opposed to selling, you know, origin cargo management. And our focus, I mean, since our founder formed the company here in the US back in the late 80s, and I was here shortly thereafter, you know, his focus was always to have one platform that ran the operations and delivered all of the visibility and control. And that's still what we do today. We've had customers come to us and say, can you just sell this to us as a SaaS platform? We do it to a degree around things like DDP shipments, for example. So like, you know, we'll just get documents from the vendor or information from the vendors, and we've got all the tracking capabilities so that, you know, we can manage DDP shipments. But for us, you know, the value that we bring is that blend of operations and tech. So, you know, we wouldn't see it being separated. But, you know, sure, for the pure software providers out there, you know, they're focused on a different sales process cycle, a different way to manage the company and support the product offering. And so we feel like our full focus on tech-driven OCM is where we need to be.
Well, and then that brings up a very interesting point that I see inside of a lot of LSPs. You mentioned something there about it's one stack from operations up to the customer, whereas there's a lot of companies that land in a place where there's sort of the operation system and then a integration, which obviously we like, but an integration over to a customer facing system that is a different platform. Like, and whether it's like, it doesn't even matter how the bits and bytes to come together, but the idea that there's a customer product and an internal product, and that and sometimes that's because you buy the internal, but you build the customer facing. So you guys have made the decision, or maybe it just evolved this way, but of a fully vertically integrated, it's one database, for lack of a better term, that's supporting everything.
Yeah. So when a vendor creates a booking, if you happen to be in the system, you're seeing that booking, right? When a PO comes in from the ERP system, everybody sees it. And operationally, as our margin operations teams are creating carrier bookings in the system, you're seeing it, right? And so there is no kind of delay in batch processing, or, and I think where it becomes even more important and valuable is when there's a new process that needs to be developed. The first thing we're thinking about is, okay, well, how do we deliver the technology to support the operations teams to do that, right? And so as opposed to, I think what happens in other companies is that they have this core system, operating system, visibility platforms, and then the customer comes with something new, and that's where the spreadsheets start to come in. So I don't think anybody's out there today as an LSP without a system, right? They all have some kind of a system, but if you're not in that happy path, then that's where things quickly fall off into Excel and emails, because that LSP still wants to satisfy you as a customer, right? So they're going to do whatever it takes to get it done, but they're not really using their core technology at that point.
So we have another question, and it's Jim, you might want to cover your ears for this one.
Okay.
It's the elephant in the room when you choose this strategy, which is what happens if the relationship goes bad, and how, Jack, would you be able to pivot? And I think it's an interesting question, specifically because in the time I've known you, you have made this pivot, right? You have changed providers that were tech enabled. So, how do you protect yourself in this relationship? And obviously, Jim, if you have any thoughts as well. But
so right, we do have a contract, and in the contract, there's an out clause, I believe, for both companies. I don't know what it is, right? But and there's time to sort of recover. But also, I think in the contract, I think I can't remember if it's 2 years or what, is that we still have access to the system after the relationship is dissolved. So, obviously, we're not at that point where I wouldn't be on the call today. So, and I don't foresee that transpiring, but I don't foresee, I wouldn't foresee a problem of pivoting to a company. And we do have that sort of assurance that we have a couple of years after the contract is dissolved of access to that information. So
yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned earlier that's important in this, you still issue the purchase orders from your mainframe.
Yep.
And ultimately, you just need back those 856s. So if you did have to change quickly, as long as you can get those two interfaces running, not that the rest is gravy, but you could survive.
You can survive. You can survive. It might be, doing anything in short or whatever, right? If we were going to dissolve the relationship, we would have to plan ahead, right? Because getting EDI files set up there's always nuances, as you know, Brian, of how they're received, and what they look like, and how they're passed on and made visible to the vendor. But anyway, we have parted with a couple of one provider that comes to mind, and there's a couple of others from a technology standpoint. And the transition, it's not easy, but you get it done in the time frame that's allowed.
We actually have, or go ahead, Jim.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's really no different from a technology perspective. You can partner with a technology company, and especially today, that technology company could be gone tomorrow. It could change its focus dramatically, right? So you've spent all this time investing in that technology company. It's really not that different than investing in, you know, an OCM provider with that technology. If anything, we've got more interest in making sure you're happy every day, right? Because we're paid transactionally for the work that we do for you. And so, like, there's a real incentive there for us to keep adding more value. And I can tell you, like, you know, we do QBRs with all of our customers, and, you know, there's constantly this, okay, what's next? You know, what else can you do for us? And, you know, when you're working with a pure software provider, I mean, I have, you know, lots of tech companies that we use for, you know, different components and things like that. I got to get on a list, right? If I want a new feature in that from that tech company, I can put my name in there and maybe they'll do it. Maybe they won't respond at all, right? And whereas with Century, Jack's going to call me if he needs to, and it's going to get done, right? So, you know, I think that's the difference, is that, you know, that you've got more power as that consumer customer with somebody like Century than you do with a pure tech player in the space. And the reality is, yeah, either one is going to be really challenging to disconnect with, right? Because you've partnered with them. I think on the Century side, you're going to get up to speed faster at less of an internal cost. And so there's more immediate value there. But to the person that asked the question, yeah, that's a decision each individual company needs to make.
Yeah, and one of the things that I don't think most companies do not do well when they're evaluating any software relationship is very clearly ask the provider at the inception of the relationship, how do I leave? Right? Who owns the data? What's your strategy for giving it to me if there's a problem? What's your strategy for, you know, like you mentioned, Jack, supporting through a transition period? But even if, you know, you're right, like they could disappear overnight, what's my exit plan? And we at Chain, and I'll ask Molly to maybe repost this because I know we've put it on LinkedIn in the past. Plug for our LinkedIn feed there, but is actually have slides that we show to our customers before they even sign with us that say, this is what you need to be doing as far as backing up the data and using our APIs and what have you to prepare yourself for an exit from day one. Right? Because it is much easier to leave a software provider if you've been preparing to leave since when the relationship was good, as opposed to waiting until, oh my God, I got to do this. I got to do this today. You know, same as having good backups. Molly just posted apparently we have a blog post on it. So there you go.
That's excellent. So, I mean, we've had, you know, some customers that have switched to us and their current provider, you know, we'll tell them, you know, effective this date, our rates double, right? Or something like that. And it's like, now you got to exit really, really fast, right? I mean, from Century, you know, fortunately, we don't lose a lot of customers, but, you know, we always look at it from a long-term perspective. You know, whoever's managing that supply chain, they may be somewhere else tomorrow. They may be at that supply chain tomorrow, right? And so it's all about relationships in our industry.
So we're running up on time here, but Jack.
And I would just quickly say is, you know, in all the relationships, whether technology was involved or whatnot, hundreds of relationships over the years, really have only had one that really went south, right? I mean, one thing I will say in this industry, companies do handle themselves very professionally. So, but I agree with you, Brian, you need to have an exit strategy as you enter the relationship is if things do go south. So anyway, but continue.
No. So, Jack, why don't you take us down the home stretch here? Kind of what have you learned through this journey, and what excites you about the future with this?
Yeah, I just think, right, you know, coming from where I did 35 years ago, where everything was manual, you know, very paper driven, you know, to where we are in the industry now and what we've been able to do in partnership with Century is just, you know, amazing, right? And we actually are moving, you know, to the next steps with Century is and doing e-documents which I'm very excited about. It's not an easy thing to overcome, but because it is a change, but we're going to just continue to grow out, right? We're not going to go fast. whatever we do when we take on, we're going to go slow to make sure it's right, and we're going to have checked all the boxes. So there's just, endless opportunities out there for us in our supply chain. So, looking forward to the journey. The only thing is, I just hope the ocean market would just calm down, so that I can just.
I thought we were going to get through this.
The wave.
Yeah, without reference.
Anyway, but yes, so that's where we're at, and future is very bright. So thank you.
And Jim, what you had mentioned new tech, but like, what are you excited about? What should people be looking forward to in the future?
Yeah, so I have one tip, but yeah, from what we're looking forward to, I think absolutely, the AI technologies that are available now and that are getting better every day, I think are finally catching up to logistics, right? Like, you can do them in healthcare, you can do them in all these other industries, but logistics is just insane. And I think, the technology is finally catching up. And so, yeah, I see like a massive evolution over the next year to 2 years where things are going to be done very, very differently in international global logistics. And I'm super excited about it. And it's a lot of the things that our team's working on right now. The one tip that I would just give out to everybody from a shipper's perspective, if you're going to consider a new LSP, if you're going to consider a new partner of any kind, once you get narrowed down to like the top 3, share your document formats with them. So like, for example, if you have an 850 document or an XML document or something, like, everybody's always we can't give you that until we nominate you. Why? There's nothing super confidential about it. And you're going to give those top 3 or 2 or whatever you've decided on the time to be able to look at your data, understand your data, and ask them to come back to you with questions, especially on the PO. Every shipper's PO is different and has some unique catch to it. And you may, by letting those 3 providers see those doc sets and ask you questions, that may help you in the integration and implementation with whoever you do decide. So I would just say, you've got an NDA, be a little bit more open in that final step.
Yeah, and I would echo that especially in the sense that that's a really good way to test them. Right?
Yeah.
Here's what you're going to be my partner. Here's all of our warts, right? The
Yeah.
amount of RFPs that I've answered in my life, especially on the LSP side, where the supply or the shipper seemed to have the impression that they needed to show off how great they were, instead of all of the awful, horrible things that happen inside their company. And then what they end up doing, they end up getting underbid by providers
Yes.
who, because it looks easy, the provider underbids it and then has to come back and either disappoint them or raise their rates. And it's frankly the shipper's fault for not just being really open and honest with all of the things that are horrible. I mean, Jack and I have worked together in the past, and he was actually very good at being like, hey, we don't have this documented. We don't even know how this piece works, and you're going to have to figure that out right from the get-go. And it made it, we all knew going in, right? So I totally agree with you. So, and I think probably a great place to wrap up here is when we're agreeing on things.
Very good.
So yeah, thank you, gentlemen. And Molly, I know we'll post the wrap up, and we'll get a link to Century. And if you have trouble finding an AutoZone, just turn out of your house, make a right, and there's probably one right there. So all right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Molly.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everybody.
everybody. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.